Merlin, Network Magic. Hi everybody, my name is John Capobianco, and I'm the creator and, lead developer, I guess, the force of nature behind an open source project that I'm going to be pushing the code up today. I'm just ironing it out, and called Merlin. And this is a network automation infrastructure as code tool and suite of tools, all with different Camelot, King Arthur, Arthurian legend themes around them. But Merlin it's about the magic, the speed, the data that we get, the transformation. It really feels like magic. And I'm a big fan of science fiction, and Arthur C. Clarke's third law states that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. So that's where we're taking this project, because it really is a magical thing. So this title of this video is What is Network Automation and Infrastructure as Code? And I'll get there in a minute. But first, let me introduce myself. My name again is John Capobianco. I'm currently a senior IT planner and integrator for the Canadian Parliament, the House of Commons. And I'd like to put a disclaimer here that anything in any of my videos or content is my own personal opinion and is in no way a reflection of the House of Commons or the Canadian Parliament. They are a very gracious, very amazing employer, particularly in their support of my open source activity, videos and blogs, and my book, and my engagement with the community, and how open I am with my work and my code. So a big credit to all of my management back at my real job. That aside, here's a bit of my bona fides and my credentials. I graduated as a computer programmer analyst from a 3-year program in St. Lawrence College in Kingston, Ontario, Canada. I didn't follow a development path early in my career. I actually had a real knack for clients, servers, and in particular networks. So I clawed my way up from the bottom with my A+ and my N+. I moved into Microsoft specialization, writing about a dozen exams, very difficult Microsoft exams, and have my Microsoft certified IT professional enterprise administrator. Now that's a 2008 flavor, and just shortly after I got my EA, the company I was with at the time, not the house, a private top 10 Canadian insurance company, they asked me to move to the network team and start focusing 100% on networks. And I jumped all in. So I achieved my CCNA, which I've had for, I'm celebrating 10 years as a CCNA. And I've maintained it the whole time. My CCNP route switch, now that's the route switch troubleshoot exam series, is the one I passed. I had my CCDA and DP, Design Associate Design Professional. And then similarly to moving into networks, the House of Commons, we were refreshing and moving into a next generation data center. So as opposed to keep moving vertical on route switch for my IE, I went horizontal and got my CCNA data center and CCNP data center, a total of 6 exams at the time. So, I've accumulated quite a bit of a catalog of certifications and accreditation and library of, 2-time CCNP, CCDP, 5-time Cisco specialist is my current Cisco portfolio. Now, network automation. So 5 years ago, approximately, we realized that the scale and the complexity of our network was just becoming too much to deal with in what I would consider a traditional or legacy fashion of driving out configuration management, asset management, and network state capture and validation manually using legacy tools, a little bit of automation here and there, but primarily a CLI-driven, human CLI-driven approach to managing a large-scale enterprise network. There was one particular, so a lot of things converged. There was a particular challenge that I was facing on the network at the distribution layer, where all of the routers live, and connect all of my buildings on the campus, about 35 of them, to the core of the network. I needed to make a change at this layer, a significant change at this layer, and I was looking for a better approach than making a notepad file per router with manual serial instructions that was going to take all weekend long and had a ton of opportunity to go wrong and make mistakes, and every command, every keystroke on every router is an opportunity for an error here. Enter DevNet from Cisco. Now this was still, I don't want to say in its infancy, but it was nothing like what DevNet is today. It was a small section at Cisco Live in 2016 in San Diego. And I devoted a good chunk of my Cisco Live time. That was my first Cisco Live ever. And I spent some time there meeting with all kinds of people approaching solving network problems differently, programmatically, and with code. Now, at the time, one of the tools that was introduced to me that I've really had great success with was called Ansible. And I went ahead and wrote a book, Automate Your Network. This is my book. And this monkey I took at the San Diego Zoo at that trip the same time I was introduced to these things. A little meta reminder to myself on how far I've come. So anyway, we fully adopt, we go all in on network automation with infrastructure as code using primarily Ansible up until even today. We use a lot of Ansible to do configuration management in particular, but also to capture network state and asset management and a few things. Now, what is network automation and infrastructure as code? It's many things. I would argue that primarily it's an approach to solving problems. It's a philosophy, and it's really become a way of life. Now, the problem solving is the key here. You have all of the tools that you need to add routes or monitor a network, right? We can do all that stuff with the command line interface. Now, here's the key, the secret, and I don't, this is my own secret. I'm lazy. I'm a lazy guy. My wife is in the living room. I'm lazy. She's going to come in and agree with me here in a second if she hears me say this too loud. But I would rather write little robots, truly write little robots, software solutions to go out and do my job for me and to do all the heavy lifting for me. All of those configuration lines at the CLI, or all of those show commands to go get certain pieces of information. There is a much better way that frees me up to do higher value work and learn and apply fabrics and underlays and keep pushing our business forward. Well, I can't be bogged down in the day-to-day business of keeping the lights on the old way anymore. So my what I'm releasing here, Merlin, is a Pythonic approach. It's basically everything I've managed to figure out and do with Ansible, a domain-specific language. That's not Python. That's typically YAML-based Ansible playbooks, which is an excellent place to start if you don't know or are not comfortable with Python yet. Well, I'm also studying for my DevNet associate, so a lot of things coalesce and converge again. I've reached sort of a tipping point at scale with my Ansible. It does not perform fast enough at the scale I'm running to be considered a viable solution for me. It is for small things, or if I need to run something like a batch job once a month or once a week, it's pretty good. But for closer to real-time information and state capture, there are better tools, which we're going to talk about. Now, I'm going to switch over to my screen here. So back to the DevNet Associate before I switch over. A large portion of this is Python and understanding Python to a pretty good degree that you can be tested on your knowledge of Python. Because as we're going to see, the new ecosystem from information technology, infrastructure as code, Well, there's a mix of RESTful APIs or next generation approaches to using the old command line interface. Those two things, and really it boils down to working with either getting or sending JavaScript object notation, or as close as we can to sending JavaScript or receiving JavaScript object notation. That's a linchpin to network automation and infrastructure as code. Some other tools I'm going to throw out there before I share my screen. You're going to want to download VS Code if you have not already started using VS Code. And that goes for anybody using all of the other IDEs. I recommend you give VS Code a look. If it's too mainstream for you, right? If it's just not edgy enough or right niche enough, if it's a Microsoft thing, the integrations with Git, the other tool that you're going to need, GitHub, Windows Subsystem for Linux, Remote SSH. There's a whole ecosystem built around VS Code. Code tours, live share. And for anyone new, it will help you write Python and YAML and JSON and XML and CSV and Markdown and on and on and on. It will literally help you write better code and simpler code and readable code and consume other people's code and interact with Git. Now, I recommend for anyone new, particularly with Git, if you're using VS Code, you can sort of use the crutch of the GUI, right? I click here and it brings up the drop down where I type in my commit message. But really take the time to launch the terminal in VS Code and do all of your Git activity at the CLI. Type in git init, git clone, git add, git pull, git push, git commit, on and on and on. Get comfortable with the CLI version of these commands. It's a big piece of infrastructure as code. We've mentioned Python, we've mentioned JSON, we've mentioned YAML. Now, here's where I come in. All right. Now, in Python, Cisco has released infrastructure as code libraries that we can import into Python and easily tap into functions that otherwise would be done through an API or through the command line interface, and incredible things that we just cannot do on our own. And so they've released Genie, the software development kit. Now's a good time for me to share my screen. And so this is where it starts. Come to DevNet and read about this whole ecosystem of tools to accelerate your DevOps, right? With PiATS, right? Now, PiATS is primarily made for certification tests. Go look for CRC errors on the network, and if you find some, mark the device as a failed test, or the interface that it's failed the CRC error check test. Okay, that's just to think about what PiATS is primarily used for. I've used it for a CI/CD safety net as well, meaning, and I've integrated this with Ansible, and this is sort of my evolutionary journey to writing my own piece of open source software. Well, I have a container that runs an Ansible playbook that pushes a configuration to a device. Well, what I do with PiATS in a different PiATS container is run, just think that CRC error, but other tests, OSPF neighbor tests, BGP neighbor tests, routing tests, interface tests, ping tests, connectivity tests. So I run those in a container in my CI/CD first, healthy snapshot, right? Then I push my Ansible playbook. Then I retest with the same suite of tests to make sure that my pre and post change passes whatever set of tests I've developed as a CI/CD safety net. And again, network automation is sort of where I come in, and I'll talk about what I've plugged in to this ecosystem that makes Merlin unique as an open source project. So again, I've mentioned the PiATS and the Genie SDK. Now Expresso, I'll get to Expresso. Those containers I talked about, well, the PiATS dashboard, the ecosystem that's RESTful API powered as well, is called Expresso. It lets me view the output and the results of these jobs and these tests. Now there's incredible stuff here, so spend some time learning about this. Now, again, my homepage is automateyournetwork.ca. I run blogs, I have book links to my book, community links, an About Me page, and I'm going to be writing about this Merlin release later today. My GitHub repository is Automate Your Network, and Merlin here will be filled up with code later today. But I have 30 repositories, many including my Ansible Fest deck. This is my Ansible Fest presentation that I did a 30-minute breakout session at Ansible Fest, and it's all there for you to consume. Open source. Now, I want to do this development freely and openly and without any constraints around the intellectual property, but I'm not going to go out and buy a Nexus 9K and rack it in my basement, right? Some people do that. Cisco DevNet has sandboxes for anything that you want to play with. So what I have here is a DevNet sandbox for the Nexus 9K. All right. Now let me talk about Merlin and my demo and some concrete examples of network automation using infrastructure as code. Now, we can sign into this through the old way, right? We putty in to the 9K. And we log in as, is this one as admin or a developer? Give me 2 seconds here. Admin, all right. So we can log in, and now we're at the CLI, and now it's up to you. You're brand new at this company, right? Go figure out what this router looks like. There's a problem, and this is one of, to my case, I don't know, 100 routers that I have. There's a problem with one of them. Go figure out what's going on, right? You need to change something on many routers. What do they look like before and after you change it? What does the asset itself look like? What parts is it made up of? What serial numbers does it have? Right? There's many things that we can automate. People sort of get stuck on configuration management. And they think that's either the end of the road or the beginning of the road, or both, for network automation. Right? I've written an Ansible playbook that pushes a VLAN to a device, all done with network automation. Right? I've pushed a config. As I'm going to show you, you can be creative with this. Merlin is about the magic. And I have 3 use cases here. So first of all, let's just capture the state of this router and then transform it programmatically into business-ready documentation. Now, to do that manually, you would need to log in, set up putty logging, run a bunch of show commands, and then parse them all with human eyes and manipulate the output some way. Well, as I will show you here, Merlin, and this is supposed to be an M made out of the Python logo, and I want to thank the community. Simon made this. Just an incredible, he really knew I was struggling with this, and he made this professional logo for the project. And it works as an icon file, it works as a standalone, right? You're going to associate this logo in the years to come with, I don't know, homebrew network automation. Maybe not even homebrew. We'll see where this goes. But for now, I love the new Merlin network magic theme and logo. So what happens is I have these Nexus 9K and I have 3 different jobs. I have the main Merlin job, which is what we're going to run. Now, what Merlin is going to do is tap into those development kits that we talked about. And let's just take a quick look at the code. There will be breakout videos where I do deeper dives, but for now as an introduction, you can just follow the comments. So, and there's been some interest in another video about how to learn Genie Learn. So Genie has many functions, including parse and learn and diff and config, and I've tapped into all of them. Now, what learn does is it is similar to the analogy from anyone who's followed my Ansible work. Ansible has info and facts modules. So I say Ansible, go get the iOS facts for this iOS router or NXOS facts for this data center piece of gear. And what it does, and what Learn does a little differently, is runs some commands and transforms the raw standard CLI output into JSON that we can then consume and program with. Well, Learn goes a step further, and I can say things like, well, let's show you here the list. Where's my list? Merlin. It's a big file. Sorry, I was on the wrong file there. So at the very top, now this is a sandbox, so I can show you a whole list of Learn features, but what I'm choosing to learn in this DevNet sandbox are the access control lists, the ARP table, or anything to do with ARP, right? Think of these as the protocols or the features, and I learn them holistically. So Genie might run 6 or 7 commands and assemble them all into a nice logical JSON file, and I'll show you one of these. So first I learn all the features. Now the next thing, again, is the Genie parse, right? So there's Genie learn, and then there's Genie parse. Well, parse is very similar, and I feed it all these different show commands that I would otherwise run at the CLI, and I parse them into JavaScript. Now the rest of this code takes that JavaScript that we now have, and it manipulates it in such a way that we get various output file types. And here is the Camelot. So Camelot is where I'm storing all the output. So if I go into the sandbox here, there's a bunch of folders, and these folders will contain the output files for all of the Learn features and all of the show commands. There's also a folder called the Grail, and the Grail is what's known as a tiny database. So because I have JavaScript object notation, JSON, I can not only manipulate it and make my own files, I can take it and insert it as tabular data inside of a tiny database, which is a document database, a NoSQL database, a serverless database, but I can query it and I can write front ends for it, like an Android phone app. So, and it is really the Grail, a database of all of these commands that you see and Learn features per device in a tabular database. So let's run it, and we're going to run, where did it go? We're going to run Merlin first, right? So Merlin, the magician, is going to learn and show and turn all that into the output files. I've added the time command. Now please remember, I'm over a 5 megabit, 1 megabit up DSL out in the mountains of northern Quebec. My Starlink's on the way, but there's some latency involved here. And the other thing to remember is I like the ASCII and the verbosity of the basic PiATS, the default I should say, which prints everything to the screen. But if you look at the time, there's a CPU time that if I suppress all that, or if you should choose to clone the repo and just comment out the ASCII and turn PiATS into silent mode, it will just run. But for the sake of fun and output visualization, so there's Merlin, the magician, and we're connecting to the devices, and there's the Excalibur ASCII there. So we're running, we're learning, and it's just incredibly fast. It's just incredibly magical. Okay, so now we've moved out as the knights are leaving Camelot on their horses, and now we're starting the show command section. There's the Grail. So now we're starting to store data, as you can see, and it sort of pauses here as it's writing all this data. And then hopefully this should wrap up with success. Okay, now it's, all right, I see now it's storing data, and there is Camelot. So this is my little flag that means everything was successful, and it gives you a hint where your data can be found in Camelot. And you can change directory, and you can see a log of the Merlin using the PiATS log view. So then here, this is one of the powerful things of PiATS. It turns everything into a step-based test that is a Boolean pass or fail. So that means that everything that I learned and everything that I parsed and everything that I stored was successful. They all passed. Now, how long did this all take? 5 seconds. 5 seconds. You can barely log into that device in 5 seconds, by the way. And again, that's constrained by my VPN. It's actually probably closer to 2 seconds. And, 16 seconds of real time. Or a minute almost of real time with all the output and everything. Incredible. So what do we get? Holy cow, John, that was fast. So look. Okay, so what do we get? I took a bit of a coffee break there. This is exciting. So what's a practical example? We've been talking about infrastructure as code. Well, now I've just learned and parsed everything there is to know. Everything there is to know about that Nexus 9K. So let's look at BGP. Let's pick a relatively high-level protocol here. So what you can see is, holy cow, right? Like I get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different representations of this file output. And it all starts and is rooted in the BGP JSON. And this, now there's minimal BGP on this 9K, but still, right, I can start to use the JSON queues. Okay, so there's a default instance with an ID of 65535. It's running. And it has the default VRF in it with both IP4 and IP6 families. It's got a cluster ID and it has one neighbor. The neighbor has, right, these counters and these information. This is starting to work with, or this is what it means to work with infrastructure as code. I don't need to do show commands. This is a bunch of show commands. Now what other, right, and that's the JSON. Now I like to take it and make what I feel like the most business ready document, the most valuable one, is a CSV file. Now this would spread with, if there's multiple instances or, right, or VRFs or neighbors, right, this would grow. So it's not the best example of a powerful CSV file, but let's go hunting in the output to find something with some meat on it. Right, so we have learned interfaces. What do the interfaces look like on this device? Okay, great. This is a good one. Look at all of these interfaces. Right? Look at them all. And it's every type of interface. Let's look at the CSV file. Holy cow, right? And I sort them like this in my nice preview. And I know not to touch the management interface. Cisco doesn't want me to touch this. Right? And I want, how many other right, look at here. So give me everything with an IP address. There, boom, filtered. How easy is that? Go find out what interfaces have IP addresses through the CLI. Show IP interface brief. You still got to look through all, right? Like this is sort, filter, find, search, whatever I need here. Okay, give me, ones with, all right, I don't care about default. What about the management VRF or the reverse? All right, give me all of them. So this is everything with an IP address. We can see we get the SVIs, we get the loopback, we get the physical interface, and we get the management interface. It's infrastructure as code, and we have this all in a nice ready-to-go spreadsheet. At scale, by the way. Now, I choose to also do a markdown file, and the markdown file renders nicely like this. Now, markdown is like when you read a README file in a GitHub repo. That's what is it rendered in. So this renders really nicely in a GitHub repo. Just point people to go to the GitHub repo. There's a list of interfaces. Yeah. I do it in YAML as well. So we actually have a dictionary in YAML that matches the JSON. We've looked at the markdown in the CSV. Well, I also do HTML. Now this is the raw HTML, but I can easily spawn this in a browser. And look, learn interface. And there's all the stuff you need to know about the interfaces in a nice CSS formatted tabular HTML page. Right now I could add little flags here and say the cell should be red if it says down. Right? Like whatever you want, it's HTML. So then I go a couple steps further with some different file types. I'm not going to be able to show you. Yeah, I'm going to need to pause the video real quick. The commands are, I've lost the commands off the top of my head. But so let's look at the mind map. Now the mind map is based off of the markdown file. Now this is huge because there's a ton of interfaces. So this isn't the best format. But as you can see, I have this collapsible, interactive, zoom in, zoom out mind map of all the interfaces as well. Again, this is generated from the markdown file. Now, the last file is a really neat file. And we're going to see. It works better for some things than others. Let's see what it looks like for interface. But amongst the CSV, HTML, JSON, Markdown, YAML, and mind map files, there's also two other files. And one is a different type of JSON. Right? So it is still JSON, but it's a little bit different representation of the data. And another HTML page, which is very minimal, but it calls a certain theme and JavaScript. And these JavaScripts are included in the repository here. These are the net JSON graph from the net JSON team. And they're open and free, and I've integrated them. Now let's take, I can't just right click and view that in a browser until I turn on the web server. So let me turn on the web server real quick in Python, and then let me open this browser up. And it's rendering, and it's pretty crazy. Kind of looks like the Eye of Sauron. But if you really look at this and pull it apart, right, this interface has, so this VLAN 104 interface has an IP and a description. Now, again, interfaces is not the best one. There's the loopback interface. You can see every interface that is up is, and if I drag this over here, they'll rearrange themselves to show the interfaces that are up, that are connected. It's not the best for interfaces. It's better for things like routes and next hops, which we can look at. We can certainly take a look at that. So but that's just one. That's interfaces. We've got it for everything. And if you're at home or watching this and say, I'd love to see what the VLANs or VRFs or whatever look like, just ping me and I'll make a separate video and do a deeper dive on any particular show command. And again, we have the Grail, the JSON database, which is the combination of all of these folders, the JSON in them, in this tiny database as tables. Okay, so that is Merlin, the magician. Now let's move on to the next bit of automation that I'm calling Excalibur. Now Excalibur is the nice sword from the stone and empowers Arthur. Anyway, I love Excalibur. I love the movie. I love everything to do with the mythology. So let's run Excalibur. Now what Excalibur is going to do, again, in Camelot, under the Cisco DevNet, there's an Excalibur folder. And what you're going to see is, you'll see in a second. Whoops, wrong button. Sorry. Let me paste in the command. So I'm going to run this Excalibur job. Let me clear the screen and run that. Whoops, clear. So I'm going to run this. Let me time it. Now, what Excalibur does is a similar thing as to what you've seen, but it makes an inventory-focused version, an asset management tool, if you will, to go and find all the serial numbers on this Nexus platform and create those files that we showed and talked about. And this happens in like a second, even over the VPN. Now, I'll make a separate video in a real environment in my lab with some mocked up obfuscated data, but I'll show you how powerful Excalibur is. And there's some things that I can't do, but let's take a look here. So there's the JSON, right? And I get the chassis information and the slot information from the show inventory command, and all of the interface information from the show transceiver command. And a CSV file, right, we boil it down to just entries that are present. And you can see this is the guts of the DevNet 9K sandbox inventory. Now, I just want to take a step here. That's not as far as I go with this tool. In a production environment, there's a few other things that I've tapped onto it. So if you have a SharePoint document library, you can just put in some basic information into this SharePoint YAML file, right? Fill this out with your SharePoint document library. And the other thing is this serial to info. If you put in your Cisco.com service contract API user and password, again, I'll do a breakout video about asset management. The Excalibur will go and create a contracts inventory file along with the basic inventory information. So that's automated state capture and transformation, automated asset management and transformation. Now the big one everyone wants and it jumps to is configuration management. Now this is going to take me a little bit to describe, but this is what network automation and infrastructure as code is really all about. And I have to use a few more tools and a few more techniques to make configuration management a possibility. Now again, this is using the SSH CLI. So the best we can do, we can still automate it, but it is imperative automation, right? It is serially, I'm literally making a little robot as a lazy guy to log into the device and run commands in a serial order. This is not without some drawbacks, particularly in removing code, right? How do I get rid of code? Well, someone has to know out that code, but I'm not going to put the know in my templates, right, or my logic. So you either need a separate bit of code as a follow-up to clean up, or you need to manually log in and know out certain pieces of the code, right? This is what we're aiming for, is item potency between an intended config that we generate and the running config on the device. Now, if someone logs into the device and adds something through the CLI, it's a crapshoot. It depends. If it's something that your intent will overwrite, you'll overwrite it. If it's something that will not be removed or overwritten, it will remain behind, but it will never show up in your intent. We need to avoid these situations. So a follow-up, I was in the middle of starting this follow-up when I decided to change direction and go with the Merlin theme. You can do through REST APIs a post and post an intended config that is declarative. I'm declaring I want this to be configured according to my intent. Now that will remove anything that anyone's done manually, and it will also remove anything you've removed from your intent. I push an intent with 10 VLANs. The device now has 10 VLANs. I remove 2 VLANs from my intent and push it. Now the device has 8 VLANs. This is unlike what I'm about to show you at the CLI, where if I put 10 VLANs in my intent and push them to the device, it now has 10 VLANs. I remove 2 VLANs from my intent and push it again. The device still has 10 VLANs. I personally can't do anything about it aside from writing up a follow-up bit of logic that will remove those VLANs, but that's not built in. So let's look at configuration management. Again, here is the running config of the device. If I do a show run, right, this is the configuration of the device, top to bottom, and it finishes up with the no logging console and the BGP and the OSPF, the VTY lines, the boot flash, right, all the things that make up this config. What we're going to do is abstract this config into 2 pieces. One, the data model, which is a YAML file, which is our intent. And it should be simple and human readable and describe things object-like, object orientation in this data model if possible. We should try to use dry principles and do not repeat yourself in this data model. And the other half is what's known as a Jinja 2 template, which is really the only thing I've brought to the table here, right? They've released Genie and PiATS, and I sort of saw this and thought, this seems like a perfect opportunity to plug in Jinja 2 templates. They have all the JSON stanzas. They have all this stuff. Where are the templates? So that's where I've come in with Merlin, and particularly here with Lancelot and Excalibur. They are all based on Jinja 2 templates. So let's take a look at this. So I have modeled the data for this Nexus 9K sandbox. And how I choose to do this is like, again, that object-oriented. And at the highest level, a router or a switch has a global configuration, and then per sub-configurations like an interface or a BGP or a router, OSPF I should say. So I handle it that way when I model my data. And you can see, let's just collapse everything. And this is how you can start modeling your own data, is do your show run or think of things in abstracted objects. So I need a global config, I need a VDC because it's a nexus, I need users and VLANs and VRFs and SVIs and port channels and obviously interfaces, loopback interfaces, and then OSPF and BGP. Well, let's go into interfaces. Well, for each interface, I describe its intent as a model, right? So Ethernet 5 is the only one that is enabled, right? So we can ignore these other ones. So it's enabled is true. It has a description. It has an IP. It has OSPF broadcast. It is not passive. It is part of instance 1, and it is OSPF area 0000. Right? Sort of the object itself, this interface. And this is typically where you're going to see things like routes, IP addresses, VRFs, VLANs, right? All of those technical things, constructs that we make up, but free of the constraints of their CLI implementation. We can get creative here. We can make things, model things tightly to our objects, and have no constraints as to how it's configured on the device, right? Throw away all the things, the configuration stanzas. This sort of can come from your Visio or your high-level diagram or your intent, turning business intent into programmatic intent. Now I'm going to split the screen and I'm going to show you how I handle the templating. So in every platform, this is how I've chosen to handle it. I have different templates. So this is an NXOS, and I have an intended config parent Jinja 2 template that has, and if you line them up, in order of how they're configured, if possible, so that when I do a side-by-side, human side-by-side, the intent is sort of in the same logical order as the running config. That's a personal preference. You don't have to do it that way. Or think of it this way, the serial order that you would configure it at the command line, right? Is a better way to interpret this. And these includes, let me call modular or smaller templates. So we're talking about host interfaces here. Let's go look at intended interfaces as a Jinja 2 template. So here's our intended interfaces. Now don't be intimidated by this, but this is where our conditional logic and our iteration logic happens. Because I need to iterate over all of these interfaces, and there's a lot of them. 64 of them. So for each interface and I'll come back to this host data model in a second. Don't worry about that. That is my anchor point into and out of my Python code. That's all that is. That's a variable placeholder for me to get into and out of my Jinja 2 template and feed it data Pythonically. But you can see .host interfaces. Well, that is this host interfaces. So for each interface, right? And then I start to have conditional logic, which is if statements. So first, right away, I need to say if it's enabled, right? So we got to remember our platform, NXOS, a interface that's shut down has nothing. There's nothing in there. Yes, you need to say shut down or no shut, but an enabled interface says no shutdown, whereas a disabled interface doesn't say anything. Slightly different platform. So what I say is, if it's enabled, well, put in the line no shutdown. And then I just check for these other things, if they're defined. And if they are defined, well, use the value per iteration through the for loop. Pretty cool, right? Now, anything in white you see, and why, what are these spaces all about here? Well, let's take a look, right? Show run in eth15. I have to template this exactly because I want it to be idempotent when I do a differential. When I compare them with a Genie module called diff as part of Lancelot, I need those spaces there, right? I need to represent it exactly. It's a template. It's like a corporate PowerPoint template or a like we've all used templates of different kinds. Don't let this trip you up. I want to rubber stamp every interface config to look exactly the same, to look like this in NXOS configuration stanza. Okay, so that is the data model and templating aspect. How do we put them together? How do we do this Pythonically? Ansible has the template module, which handles all the heavy lifting for you, and is really a great place to start if maybe my Python seems like a bit much. It's not. And I'll do a deeper dive on the configuration management. But let me just read the comments and go over it real quick. Right, so in Lancelot Pi, I'm not going to get into the config other than highlighting that anchor point into Jinja. But I'm using the PiATS framework here. And for every device in my testbed, there's only one device in this testbed in the NXOS sandbox. Well, first I load the data model. And then I learn the config, just like the Merlin. But this time, instead of learning a feature, I'm learning the full configuration. Can you believe that? The whole thing in JSON. Right? Now, I've stuffed that in a variable, and we'll come back to that at the end. That's a pre-change state. Go get the current configuration before I touch it and artifact it, right? Write the pre-change file, write that out to a file. Create the intent from the template and data model. And here is that anchor point, host data model. What is host data model? That is in my Jinja 2 template. I talked about that. Well, it equals data model, and data model equals the loaded data model from YAML. And now I render it with Jinja 2 render, and now I have my rendered intended config ready to go. So next I push it to the device using device.configure, right? So we have device.learn, device.parse, device.configure. And you're going to see this. This is the little robot I'm talking about. This is like, you'll see it line by line as if you've written a little robot that could sit at the command line and type in these commands for you. It's just incredible. It's Merlin. It's magic. Now I recapture the state again. Okay, so I've changed the config, possibly. Go and learn it again and save that as my new learned config. Write the post-change state as a new golden image. That's my new golden image, my new intent-based config. And then here's what I really like is to show the differential. And if there's a differential, print it to the screen with some custom ASCII that shows there's a differential. Otherwise, print that there's no differential and that you've achieved item potency. between the two. So my base data model, that's all we need to touch here now is the data model. And I'm not going to change interfaces. I'm going to use VLANs for my example here. And these are the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 VLANs the sandbox comes with. And to show you that I'm not cheating in any way, right, if I do a show VLAN here, right, we start at 100, we end at 105. Now let's run, let me clear the screen. This is exciting. This is the big, I've been building up to config management. All right, here we go, and we're going to time it. Now remember, I'm expecting item potency here. I haven't changed the data model. I want to make sure that they match, though, that my intent matches my running config right now before I touch it. Hands-free, I'm not doing anything. And I'll highlight when the robot kicks in. There's Merlin, the magician. So right now I'm learning the configuration. This is the configuration that I'm learning. Now, right here, Lancelot, I'm pushing the intended config to the device. You see this? Look closely. I'm in config mode. I'm in config VDC mode. I'm back in config mode. I'm in config VLAN, config VRF, config interfaces. Hands-free, like a little robot. Little Lancelot is out there just line by line configuring based on my intent. Now let's let this go. It's not done yet. It's got OSPF to do. It's got BGP to do. We're down to management interface. There's the line console. Boom. Hey, look at this. Everything passed as a test. And let's see, right? The two little knights, Lancelot and Lancelot, they match. Intent matches running. Item potent. Pretty cool. Now let's affect change with just a simple thing. Let's go to the VLANs and let's add 10 name Lancelot, 20 name Merlin, 30 name Camelot. Let's do 42, why not? Name Excalibur. So I'm going to add 4 VLANs here by saving this file. That's all I've done. I've added my 4 VLANs to my intent. And let's go ahead and see what happens. Again, the time, by the way, was 3 seconds. 3 seconds. Capture the config, put it in JSON. Generate an intent, push the intent, recapture the config, do a differential in 3 seconds. So here we go. Now let's look for those 4 VLANs here. There they are. VLAN 10, 20, 30, 40 in config VLAN mode. This is what excites me about network automation and infrastructure as code. Being able to work this way. Now wait till you see the artifacts. Wait till you see the output that we get. Like, this is nothing. Well, this is not nothing. This is incredible in itself. But let's look. Okay, look. Bang. Hey, amazing. Warning. There are changes. And you can see the red knight does not match the green knight. They are not item potent. Because we've plussed in the diff. We've added these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 lines of config, and we've removed this other line of config. And you can see right there are our 4 VLANs in 2.7 seconds over a terrible VPN. Think of it as instantaneously, right? You might as well just say in real time, we've just done all of these incredible things. Magic. It's magic. It has to be magic. Now wait till you see the output. So we hop into the Lancelot folder here. And let's start with the intended configs, what we've generated. And they're time stamped So the bottom file in every one of these folders is always going to be our latest golden image or latest set of changes, the latest time Lancelot has run. Well, let's take a look. Here's the VLAN section. This was the original idempotent config. And now here is our new intent with the 4 VLANs we wanted. So now if I look at, I'm going to put these side by side. Again, remember, we capture, this one's called the, no, hang on, I got them backwards. This one is called the original golden image for that timestamp. And if we find VLANs, right, we can see the original set of VLANs. Well, this is our golden image now has, right, the VLANs. Incredible. Now let's run it again and confirm that it's idempotent again and that they match, because I haven't changed the intent, but there's those new 4 VLANs should be present in the running config now. And when this gets to the end, we're expecting 2 green knights. Really exciting, really powerful stuff. So there's a couple of other files I still need to show you. There's one last file, and then I'm going to wrap this up. I've confirmed all the code is working, at least on the Nexus platform. I'm going to spin up a couple of more sandboxes and make a few more videos today. But I hope to have the code live. There they are, green and green, very soon. Idempotent. Okay? So now the last file I want to show you here is this changes file. So check this out, right? How do you operate your network, right? How do you know what's changed and when? Was it successful? Who added it? How many hands are touching your network at any given time? Well, if you all adopt this DevOps approach, this infrastructure as code approach, right, on this date and time, the configs matched. My intent, my offline repo matched what's in the running config. Okay, what about, oh, well, there, bang, I have differentials. And then bang, they're idempotent again. I literally have a log here of the state of the running config. I can change it at will with my own, just updating what? Well, we just update the data model, right? Now, I haven't templated absolutely everything, but in theory, I'll get there, and then you just update the data model and the config's taken care of. Now, I'm not going to show the, there are some deficiencies here that I talked about. What if I remove something from the intent, or what if I add something at the CLI? It doesn't handle every use case, but that is coming. That is the very next thing I'm working on, is using the REST API on the NXOS platform, the REST conf, and pushing a declarative config. This video was very long. I don't know if you've even made it here to the end. If you have, congratulations. And I want to thank you for your support. You can follow me on Twitter. I'm open to questions. I'll be making a ton of video content over the next couple of weeks to support the project and do deeper dives. If you want to see something specific or had a question you'd like me to address, please just contact me on Twitter. Thank you very much. Please go get vaccinated. I'm halfway there. I've got my first shot, and I encourage you to go get yours. Thank you.